Today, I'm joined by Jagdeep Singh, a seasoned technology executive with more than 25 years' experience driving transformation across complex organisations. As a Chief Technology Officer, he's led large-scale change programs, shaped operating models, and helped organisations navigate the intersection of business, strategy, and technology. We hope you enjoy the episode, and don't forget to check out the show notes for key resources mentioned. Jag, we're going to talk about governance across technology for the not-for-profit sector, the very broad area of technology, and I guess the challenges that boards are being asked to govern systems they can't fully see. You've had a lot to do in this space. Maybe we just kick off with some of your observations from what you're seeing and hear in the not-for-profit sector.
Thanks for inviting me, and good to have this conversation. Yeah, absolutely. Boards are being asked to govern increasingly the complexity in the systems where systems are deciding, and the management and the board don't necessarily have a view in terms of how some of those decisions have been arrived at. So right now, you could argue that that's happening somewhere between 10 to 30%, depending upon which study you rely on. But we all know increasingly it's going to be beyond 50%, and maybe in 3, 5, 7 years' time, 70 to 80% of the decisions are being made by the systems. I think there's also a flip side, which is the intelligent machines, or the so-called AI revolution, will go into a space where machines are exploring areas or going beyond the grasp of human intelligence. So they are finding paths, avenues, theories, potential customers, suppliers, markets for our businesses, which the boards and the organizations have never actually thought of, and hence are deciding on some of those decisions, which are again beyond the grasp of human intelligence. I think that would be a much broader and interesting space that will hit us in the 3 to 5 years' time. But yes, right now, it's quite a vexed problem. Yeah.
Wow. And for those of us, me specifically, who are not confident and not comfortable in this space, that sounds really scary. But let me just take us back a little bit. If I think of the not-for-profit sector, the vast majority of organisations are small, sometimes volunteer run, but even those with a small number of employees are having some form of IT infrastructure, and they're needing to evolve into the next phase of that. And for many who don't have the technical skills, who are sitting on boards, perhaps they don't know the questions that they should even be asking. What are the sorts of things perhaps you're mainly seeing there, just on that real basic end of being a director of a not-for-profit?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Phil. Maybe if I start with a couple of examples. In the aged care space, the government has come up with, I think it's called an integrated assessment tool, that with the aged care reforms, every not-for-profit who is in aged care or care at home services has to use. Now, the government will argue it's not an AI tool. It is quite close to that. And the tool is quite restricted, where aged care providers were able to previously make a human-based call on what package is relevant for which particular person in an aged care space. The tool is now deciding, and it is quite restrictive in the sense to override the tool. Now, that has beyond the decision-making capabilities of that tool, and there's a lot of feedback for the government on the tool. But the point I'm trying to make is the decisions that tool will make for the organizations direct the organizations into a particular direction, perhaps changes their case mix, perhaps changes their demographic mix. And those are real decision implications that the board and the management of such organizations face because of a decision-making capability of a technology per se. I use a second example and then perhaps come to maybe what the boards can do, or what I've seen is perhaps a bit more effective than a journalistic approach to it. The second example is, I think most not-for-profits and for-profits for that matter are using lots of systems where we put our customer information. We call them CRM systems. Most of those systems have for years been providing prediction on the success of this particular customer or how much revenue we can make. Recently, there's been an example where a lot of not-for-profits charities have been using a third-party platform to reach out to donors. And that third-party platform was relying on a CRM that, for example, conveyed to the person who was calling the donor that Phil is a better prospect than Jag is. And while in that particular transaction that is helpful for that call center person, over time, collection of such decisions is certainly shaping the response of the charity organizations on which
Yes.
cohort of donors they should focus on and which cohort of donors they shouldn't. And that subtle change in behavior because of machine-led intelligence then was subsequently detected and has been proven wrong and biased. Now, that is an example of where machine is making decisions over a long period of time, and the consequences are only visible after a period of time, and you are not aware how the intelligent systems has shifted the behaviors of your organizations. I think to your question that what can members of the board and the members of the management do, I think one suggestion I have is to look at all things AI in a framework of what is commodity AI, what is operational AI, and what is a strategic AI. And that question is important for each and every not-for-profit, and it's going to be distinct for each and every not-for-profit. Instead of saying everything is an AI, if we layer that up, then that's a different story. And I'll give you an example. Commodity AI is all of us have access to the large language models that we're using. I'm using ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini, and I'm assuming everyone out there is. Now, that in my eyes is pretty much like salt and sugar. Everyone's capacity and capability to use such a technology, there is very little to no barrier. So in theory, you and I and a not-for-profit organization and for-profit ASX 100 or ASX 50 organization, we're all on the same level playing field. So that's a commodity AI. The advantage one person's going to get over other is limited because in theory, you and I have access to the same technology. I think then within an organization, then the next level of AI is the operational AI. And that depends upon what kind of technology tools and systems are we using. Not-for-profit can be using a Salesforce as a CRM. If you're in aged care, you might be using a Care as a care management system. Large organizations are using SAP or Microsoft D365. So those organizations and those tools are investing billions and billions of dollars to enhance those tools and put AI into those tools. Depending on an organization where the crown assets of that organization or the key data of that organization sits, dictates where your operational AI is and where you're going to get some operational benefits, whether that's insights on how to allocate the aged care funding better, or which customers to target from a donor perspective as we used, or if you are a medical technology startup company, what cohort of potential technologies or healthcare solutions you should be focused on. That information is coming from the tool sets that you're using and the enhancements in that tool sets that are being provided to you by the organizations. So that to me is that operational AI. So the board's got to separate that. And I think the top level is what I would say is the strategic AI. And what I mean by that, and we will hear the term agentic AI being used a lot, and that is if your AI can work across systems, if your AI can work across HR and payroll, and onboarding and offboarding and customers and suppliers, and can provide you real end-to-end insights. And it does not matter whether you have one system or 20 systems. Now, that is a strategic AI. That strategic AI, in theory, has decision-making capabilities. A long answer to your question, but where I'm coming to as a board, the board needs to be clear what is commodity AI. And so it should be a focus, but it should be 10, 20% of the board's focus. What guardrails we have and what tool are we going to allow and not allow? What benefits, opportunities exist by using and enhancing the technology the business already has. And so true in the not-for-profit sector space, because every not-for-profit is perhaps using somewhere between 10 to 20 systems. Not-for-profits don't necessarily have an integration layer where all the tools are talking to each other. The data is still being extracted from one system.
And they've evolved over time, right? There are bits added here and there. And I guess my other observation with that is, even not at a board level, but if we talk about governance at a team game, the most senior manager, whether that's a chief executive or an executive director, whatever the title is, they're often not skilled in technology either. So they're often relying on whoever they're outsourcing that knowledge to, and dare I say it, sometimes who they're outsourcing that to has a vested interest in upselling them into perhaps systems that they don't actually require.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely true. And hence an importance of a framework and prioritization to make sure the board is fully aware of what matters. A couple of things I would say in the not-for-profit space, and maybe weaving in the cyber angle, perhaps. The technology space, and I'm using the word technology, covers cyber, AI, data, and digital. So the board has to look at this space as one cohesive thing, not necessarily what are we going to do about AI and what are we going to do about cyber and what are we going to do about data.
But we just want to solve our CRM problem, Jack.
We just want to solve it. And so the CRM problem, by definition, it's your customer relationship management. And so who is your core customer and what is the minimum data you need in that space? Previously, the default was, if we want better reporting, if we want better insights, we should put everything into one system and we should make it bigger or bigger. The technology now allows us to have that just-in-time insights that does not necessarily require a huge data repository of every information in one piece of technology. It solves for, especially for not-for-profits or organizations of smaller size, it solves the problem of integrations that our systems don't talk to each other. So those are some of the benefits of AI. The challenge for the board is, what is that operational opportunity for us and what is that strategic opportunity for us, and perhaps that commodity opportunity for us.
You mentioned the word cyber. So if I think of our NFP study we just released, 60% were in human services. So it's a big part of the not-for-profit world, right? They're holding some pretty sensitive data. Even smaller not-for-profits in that space are holding sensitive private data. Boards have to make sure that that is held safely. What would be the one question that you would ask as a director if you were joining one of these organisations to satisfy yourself that we had the right controls on that sort of area?
At the organisations I work for, the first question I normally ask is, what is our recovery capability? Not necessarily our protection and defence capability. In one of my previous roles involved in a global cyber incident. What that incident taught me, what matters is the recovery and the speed of recovery. Does the board has a fatigue management plan? And what I mean by fatigue management plan is, when the crisis happens, you typically have that group of 5 or 10 people who are charged with recovering your organization back to health. And you do not have a sleep and come back and start again and do your 16-hour day. It is 24/7 until you recover. Does the board have a crisis management plan, which they have done the dress rehearsal in real time. And what I mean by that is we're doing this podcast. Should we have an unannounced emergency drill, we will stop this and we will follow the protocols, and the fire wardens will come out and we will do everything that we are supposed to do. Some boards still do not have a crisis management plan, but most do. But of the most that do, their practice runs is very theoretical. And very prepared and a consultant led. And in my experience, I've only seen 2 not-for-profit boards where the chairman was game enough to actually call an out of turn board meeting and say, okay, we have a crisis and X amount of data has been lost, and ask the board and the management team to, for the next 6 hours, stop the business and help him understand how we will recover and who will do what. Now, that amount of preparation, I think, will convert into hundreds and thousands of saved dollars, effort, and addition to reputational damage instead of reputational kind of damage. I think in the not-for-profit space, the cyberspace has a couple of angles. One is the biggest risk is the third-party risks in terms of technology tools. So I said previously, most not-for-profit boards are using up to 20 different systems, and most of them are cloud. Most of them are sourced through their outsourced IT service provider. That IT service provider is potentially sharing that system with few other not-for-profit organizations to achieve some bulk licensing and other things. So I think there's an angle of governance there. What data is going where? Who is governing what data? Is that data, do we have a sovereign risk angle, as in the data must stay in Australia, for example? The bigger risks I see, though, in the systems that are perhaps not official systems. They are the shadow cloud systems every not-for-profit is using. For example, WhatsApp. For example, a lot of marketing teams or the people who are doing marketing and outbound communications are using tools like Canva, for example, for the designing and pamphlets and other purposes. A lot of people in not-for-profit space are using Google and Google Drive, right? Yet it might not be classified as one of the systems that we use in a not-for-profit sector. You use calendar sharing systems, you use note-taking systems. So while there will be an official 20 systems that a not-for-profit is using, and it's outsourced, and there's a support and a maintenance and in theory a cyber protection agreements in, there are potentially 10 plus other systems that we're using without realizing that we are using, where the sensitive data is being shared, that that the board does not have the visibility on, or we haven't tried to articulate those systems in our IT risks system. So that's a second example that I say.
Just fascinating. Our NFP study findings on this picked up this area where the not-for-profit sector was running behind the for-profit sector, in particular in terms of how might we use AI to be more efficient or achieve better outcomes. And often directors in not-for-profit boards were saying, oh, yeah, if I'm on a for-profit board as well, I'm often bringing those insights into the NFP space. Are you getting that sense that not-for-profits are a little bit behind their for-profit counterparts?
I think my practical experience is that it's mixed. There certainly is a lot of AI usage happening, whether it's allowed or not. So in terms of the policy space, you still have NFPs who would say we do not allow AI, which I do think is a flawed position. And then you have probably the vast majority of NFPs in the middle that in theory have an AI policy, but there's question mark in terms of how we're governing and measuring it. That operational AI has 2 angles. One is whether we like it or not, the vendors are introducing that functionality into all the cloud-based systems. So you and I, we use Microsoft Teams and we use Microsoft Word and PowerPoint. AI is inbuilt and it's coming in whether we like it or not. Similarly, most board directors will have one or other platform where all the board packs go.
All the papers, yes.
All of those tools are now summarizing things in AI for the board members. So whether we like it or not, the vendors are imposing that technology onto the boards. And similar thing is happening at operational level within those organizations. So I think the governance angle is loose in terms of what decisions are being made and do we have a human in the loop and do we have any guardrails around those decisions, right? And if those decisions are being made, how are we calibrating those decisions against other guidelines? So, for example, a delegation of authority is a common thing that we understand as accountants. As how do you apply that in an AI agentic world? So that level is a little bit of a discovery, a little bit of a miss that I'm seeing. I did wanted to bring it to the other side though, which is the opportunity space. And I think the opportunity space is massive for not-for-profits. Firstly, I might address the cost question. There is typically this angle of we can't afford the $50 per month charge that is an enterprise license. The point that I'm making is most not-for-profit boards are not aware that there are not-for-profit and charity plans available with most of these large language model providers that they should ask the questions and get. Most of the third-party support providers, so the IT support providers, should have access to these charity and not-for-profit licensing models that most boards sometimes don't ask the questions and are not aware of. Most boards are not aware that you can control it, as in Phil, you can have access and I don't have access. That is equally possible. And obviously the guardrails of the organizations in terms of what to do and what not to do and the reporting, all those things are possible and quite cheap to do. So that would be, I think, the first thing I'd say. I think the second thing I would say is that ability to provide that license for controlled innovation to your teams to go out and experiment and say what is possible. What is, if I have a choice around 3 particular aged care packages, which one will be most relevant in Illawarra and why, compared to Sydney, for example. We have, we waste, most not-for-profits will waste a lot of amount of time in extracting information from one system and dumping it in another system or trying to marry that information up. With the new technology, it is possible to eliminate that effort without adding a new tool, for example. But that is a level of controlled experimentation and innovation that the board needs to authorize and govern, but more importantly, measure to make sure it is still within the guardrails of the organization, and then figure the next steps out. Because this is also a space where nobody knows the right answers. The world is moving at a much faster pace. AI and cyber and other technologies are real time. So that potential board governance, which still is hands out, but eyes and noses and ears in, but maybe is sometimes a daily, sometimes a weekly governance, what that model of the future is and what that right fit is. I think that's a philosophical thing for us to solve. Yeah.
And it's interesting. I picked this up in a couple of different areas of boards asking questions, but boards then need to question the answers as well.
Correct.
And you can only do that effectively if you have a sufficient level of knowledge on the topic, whether that's in finance, whether that's in care, whether that's in digital and technology. So are we getting to this era where we're needing directors to have such a broad range of skill sets and knowledge to properly fulfill that role, and how the heck are they going to do that?
Yeah, I think so. My view is that broader generalistic experience, which can cover not just a cyber angle in a technology, technology enterprise in terms of data and cyber and your key assets, but then link it back to finance and link it back to HR or link it back to the business that we are in. That is absolutely going to be extremely important. I think the board will have to move beyond policy, is my view. The policy can be we must not, or we allow the use of this AI. That is still words on a piece of paper. How does a
Yes.
board measures it as relevant to that particular organization? I think that is a question and a series of question and answers to arrive at a fit for purpose metrics that are relevant to that particular organization. And I can use an cyber example, for example. A lot of NFPs I work for will say, oh, we follow an essential Australian Signals Directorate's recommendation. So what are you measuring? Oh, we're measuring how many systems are getting patched, how many systems have multi-factor authentication. Well, what does that tells you? So there's a gap between we are doing something around cyber versus what maturity level we are in and what is the fit for purpose maturity level for us as an organization. Not everyone needs to have a maturity level of 5. A lot of not-for-profits will be okay if they have a maturity level of 1 on the bulk of their systems, but have a maturity level of 3 or 4 on their core crown assets, so their personal information or age care information. So that level of information or distinction is missing. Similarly, at that operational level, if we're going to turn on AI, we better turn it on the core business that we are in, not on the non-core business that is not necessarily going to be a value add. And if you're going to turning it on the core value add, that might be one system, that might be 5 for most not-for-profits. How are we then getting the best bang for our buck in terms of, are we getting the right licensing?
In wrapping up today, I did want to come back to a comment or observation you made earlier about boards encouraging some experimentation with AI, but dare I say it also with things like cyber and how can we best run the various hypotheticals that we might as a board. But also echoing in my ear is those not-for-profit executives who are so under the pump with their day jobs in delivering care or putting on an arts program or running a sporting organisation. They're going to say, I don't have time for experimentation. I've just got to get on and do what needs to be done. That, I think, perhaps then comes back to this area of culture and how does the board instill an innovative culture or a culture of experimentation, of saying, yeah, we actually do need to put aside some time to do those sorts of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And right now, especially around AI, the signal versus noise issue is quite big.
Yes.
Everyone's talking about AI. And I think it's a collective job of the board and the management to work together and find the right signal that is fit for purpose for that organization. I don't think one director can do it. I don't think the CIO or the CTO or the CISO can do it, nor can the CEO do it. It is that collective experimentation that will help organizations find what is that fit for purpose niche, right? And how do they focus? And Phil, that is my experience with most large companies. ASX 50 onwards, everyone is in that experimentation space to say, okay, we've solved the commodity AI. People are using it.
Yep.
The big companies like Microsoft and Google's and SAPs and Salesforce are throwing billions at it, and we can't control what they are doing. So that is again being accepted. I guess the fruit is at the top. How do you find that fit for purpose use cases that work across our business and give us some insight, some decisions, some new revenue areas, new customers, or new funding that takes us forward? couple of not-for-profits that I've recently worked with. I use a framework called Focus. And the first one is essentially around filtering the noise. What business are we in? If we are in an aged care business, well, let's talk about, what are we worried about? Are we worried about revenue? Are we worried about retention? Are we worried about funding? The second thing is the O in the focus, which is we need to look at technology as one. It can't be AI here and cyber here and data here. The C, it's around crown assets. Where is our most valuable protected data sitting? The U is around urgency, and that's around experimentation too, so a bias towards action. And the final one, and maybe it should be the first one, S is around service. Don't lose the fact that most not-for-profit and for-purpose organizations are trying to serve a part of our community, a sporting organization, a disability organization. It is important, again, we don't lose sight of we are here to benefit that end customer, if I can use the word. So that service angle, again, dictates the loop from the F to the S. And I kind of have used this framework to get the board to, one, focus and prioritize, be comfortable with that uncomfortable that we don't know the answers, but we're going to give some approval to go out and experiment and come back in 2 months' time and see what have we able to achieve. And so that's how I would answer the question.
And I love it. I love the fact that you've picked up in that model almost this goes back to the NFP governance principles, understanding the purpose of the organisation, how we're going to achieve that purpose, and using technology in that regard. So
absolutely. And we're not using AI because something new thing has arrived in the world. We are using AI to benefit the purpose
to achieve that purpose. Jag, it's been fantastic chatting to you today. I really appreciate your time and thanks for your insights.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you for having me.
Good on you.